You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
There was a little bar in Mill Valley where all the Starfleet trainees used to go.
The 602 Club.
You know it.
I was there more times than I can remember.
Welcome, everybody, to the 602 Club, coming at you from, well, right before the Starkiller base was destroyed. I gotta say, sure is nice here. There's a lot of snow. I really like this planet. Yeah. Good job, guys. Good job. Really well engineered. Don't you think, John?
I think it's, I've always thought that it would have been cooler had they built the base and then like sort of the planet formed around it sort of thing. It was such a big technological thing. But hey, that's the way I think. But yeah, I'm going to miss snow this winter, so I'm happy to be here. Whatever planet Starkiller Base is. I can't imagine there was a planet called Starkiller Base at first.
No, actually, fans have speculated that it was hollowed out Ilum.
Well, I thought
Which would
Ilum
make sense.
I thought that Ilum was largely destroyed when Ahsoka went to it. The image I had in my mind was of it. It was like basically shattered into pieces.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think it's shattered into pieces, but it has been heavily mined.
Okay.
That is for sure.
Maybe that's it. Maybe I need to revisit the Ahsoka book to find out what the description was.
Aside from that, before we completely get off the track and people have no idea what we're even talking about, the reason we're coming from you from Starkiller Base is we're going to be talking about the latest book from Star Wars called Phasma by Delilah S. Dawson that has just been released this past Force Friday 2 or 3 or however many numbers you want to put in front of it. It's just Force Friday. That's what it was. And we're going to be talking about that. I'm really excited to do that. So before we dive into everything, just a quick reminder, of course, you can find us all over the place, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iTunes at itunes.com/TrekFM. We're a featured provider there. You can also leave us a star rating and review while you're there. It would really help out the show. Makes it easier for people to find us when they're searching for shows just like the 602 Club. So hit us up with the star rating review, and anybody who does that gets thanked on the show. And so you can also find us on Twitter at TrekFM, Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We do have our listeners-only discussion group, and that is on Facebook. You can get there by typing Babel into the search field on Facebook, or you can go to our website at trek.fm, and while you're looking around at all of our different shows, any of those show pages, you can press discussion, and it would bring you there as well. If you would like to send us an email, we love getting those. Go over to trek.fm/contact, choose the show, choose the 602 Club, and that will come to me and any other host there that week. And so, John, I wanted to ask before we dove into the book, we had Force Friday. It was 2 different books got released. We got Phasma and Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and that one is by Claudia Gray. We'll be talking about that one next week on the 602 Club. But I just kind of wanted to know, with these 2 books, obviously there was a deluge of books that came out, and we covered them all before the Force Awakens. Were you excited about these 2 books coming out, as it's the journey to The Last Jedi?
Oh, so many journeys. They're always having us
so many journeys.
Places.
I mean, we're all on a journey, John. So
honestly, I enjoy the callback to one of my favorite '80s bands too. So Journey was pretty fantastic.
Which fits because they just told us to don't stop believing.
That's right.
So.
I was as excited as anybody could be for the books. I was very interested in. We're big fans of Claudia Gray, so I saw she was writing a book. Hey, I'm in. But then Phasma had me intrigued because I think that this was a character that I was curious as to why so much was made of her leading up to The Force Awakens, which is kind of unfair because she was sort of supposed to be the Boba Fett character. I was supposed to be captivated by her, but I think they overplayed their hand leading up to it so that I didn't have an opportunity to be captivated by her. I was anticipating her too much. So I was very much looking forward to the opportunity to find out what made her special, so to speak.
I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that was so interesting by creating such an aura about her before the film, and I don't think that I'm misstepping when I say she was utterly disappointing in the movie.
Yep.
And I think everybody universally feels like that. She just wasn't. I mean, the only thing that happens to her, really, is that she is taken out by Chewie, which is hilarious, and then thrown into a trash compactor after she gives up very easily the shield codes for Starkiller Base. So with those two things in mind, I think everybody came away scratching their heads thinking, what's so great about Phasma again? What?
You know, it's almost like the Worf effect, because here we are on Trek FM. Might as well make a Star Trek, allusion here. But I've always called it the Worf effect, where Worf was the Klingon. He was supposed to be the tough guy. And Phasma was sold as, oh, here's a super trooper. This is really wild. And then the one fight you see, she gets her helmet handed to her. And is like, well, okay. It's sort of like Worf spent, several seasons on The Next Generation just getting his butt handed to him over and over again, to the point where it was like, well, I don't see him as tough. I just see him as fodder at this. He just wears the enemy out before they get to Picard or something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't until Deep Space Nine at the very end where he finally kills the Chancellor of the Klingon Empire.
Spoilers.
And has the chance to become the Chancellor of the Klingon Empire.
Yeah.
Yeah, he stops getting his butt handed to him in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, so, and that's the thing, is I think that Phasma would have been a cool and fun character had they done less press for her leading up to it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, the moment they decided to bring her back in The Last Jedi, I think that they did feel the need to explain the character, to kind of give us a reason for her being back, and not just being a character that, was lost to a Sarlacc, basically, or a trash compactor. And what Delilah Dawson does here, and this is one of the things that I think is so interesting in the book, is that, and this is happening a lot more in the Star Wars books, and I think it's because it allows them freedom, which is to do books that become character studies. And I think it's very clear that this book, in a lot of ways, is a character study of who this person is and what it is that causes the actions that we see in The Force Awakens to make more sense.
Sure. Yeah, and why she would be feared and domineering, and what she did to get to that position. But also, I think that the character study of Phasma is done in such a way to become, in a large sense, the story of the character of the First Order, and how even that has evolved through time. The First Order was something before Phasma showed up, but then she has come to embody what the First Order, as led by Kylo Ren and Armitage Hux and Phasma, is going to be. And so I think that in and of itself is sort of an interesting world-building moment of understanding how something can start as a very, and I'm not saying this in a positive manner, but something can start as a very pure ideal, but even that is going to come to be corrupted over time as people like Phasma become part of it.
Yeah, I think that is something that is so fascinating in the story, because, so much to dig into. But just talking about Phasma, because we'll get to the First Order in just a little bit, and really, like you're saying, this is all interconnected, which is one of the things I think that makes the book so, I'll just go out and say it, I think this is a great book, because the way in which everything fits together is thematically is really well done. I think Delilah Dawson does a great job of taking all of these themes and using the story she's telling about Phasma to also tell that story about the First Order and how all of these things could fit together. And as, Star Wars tends to do, I think give us maybe a little bit of a look at history and our present and our past and our future all together. And I think it's just really well done. But the thing that struck me just about the character specifically is that this is a person who knows exactly what she is. And what she is the embodiment of Darwinian theology. Of just, she will do whatever it takes to survive. It doesn't matter who she has to kill, who she has to betray. I mean, this is that kind of character. She will do literally whatever it takes to survive. That's all that matters to her. And I thought that was kind of a fascinating thing to see, to see a character who was so sold out to only one idea, and that was her own survival.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting as well because she was anachronistic within her own culture. And I think that's the really interesting thing as well about her arc, is that you can't chalk it up. It would be very easy to look at where Phasma comes from. And this is not a spoiler, but she comes from a planet where life is very difficult. You have to have your wits about you, and you have to be a great fighter to survive. Simply to exist is a battle on her planet. But even within that context, you come to find out that she is different in the sense that everybody around her is working for the good of the tribe to survive, so to speak. All of the tribes are there, and they're cutthroat with each other, but they're still tribes. But even within that context, Phasma is singular. She exists only for self. So she is even, I agree with you, she exhibits that Darwinian ideal, but even Darwinian, sort of survival of the fittest stuff has room for the tribe to exist, has room for the herd, has room for these things because these animals will carry forward. But then you get that special jewel every so often that comes in and is just unique from birth. So I think that in a sense, there's an interesting study in the nature of evil in a sense, because, we see with Anakin's arc that evil is not, you're not born bad. Your circumstances can lead to you making bad decisions and you becoming bad. Whereas Phasma seems to be, to make a callback to a very old school black and white movie, The Bad Seed. She's always the one that just from the get-go was a problem. And the thing is, Hux is a part of this story, and he seems to have always been a problem. Are we getting some sort of shadowy fill-in about Kylo Ren? Was he always a problem?
Ooh, that's a really great question. Man, I had not thought of that, but it would make sense for this First Order to kind of collect people like this. Yeah, wow. I really like what you said about the idea, and I thought that was one of the fascinating things, is that she is an outlier on her own planet. Even though this planet, as I said, she's kind of this embodiment of Darwinian ideology, theology, of survival of the fittest, she takes that to the nth degree, right? Like to mean only her. Whereas the planet itself is kind of the embodiment of survival of the fittest. You have to be the fittest to survive on her planet, especially at the part of her planet that she lives. They live on all of these crazy rock formations that's close to the sea. Their planet seems to have been one that, as far as they know at the beginning, they don't really know what happened to their planet because so much has been lost. And basically, I mean, to put it in terms that people could understand, if you haven't read the book, it's Mad Max and Star Wars. Like, that's the kind of planet they live on. It's this awful post-apocalyptic world where people have turned to the basic instincts of survival, and like you said, they've become these little tribes where it's just about the tribe surviving, and we're going to do whatever it takes for the tribe to survive. And there's wars between the tribes, and she's the one who just kind of transcends all of that. And it's like, I don't care who survives as long as I survive.
But at the same time, there's an odd sort of symmetry to those that want to survive the decimation of the Empire. She really does, in a sense, embody the First Order itself, in that the Empire is destroyed, the galaxy has been torn asunder, and if you were an Imperial, you would look about and see a wasteland of disorder and chaos and fear and destruction, as Cardinal does. And Phasma really does embody that First Order mentality of, no, I will impose order on this chaos, and I will make it make sense, and I will make it livable and survivable.
Sounds almost like a Dark Knight I know, where he says that you have to make the world make sense. The world only makes sense if you force it to.
Hashtag not my Dark Knight. But the
I'm just saying that what you just said sounds an awful like a Batman I know before Superman turns him around. Anyway.
Did you pull anything stretching for that? Did you pull something?
No, I didn't have to. It was right there. You just laid it out on the table, and I took it.
Well, there you go. You know what? You just proved that Batman is now Phasma. There we go. Thank you, and good night.
Batman equals Phasma.
There you go.
At least that Batman, yes. Wow, that's funny. So, you know what? No, I really like this because one of the things that's so interesting about Phasma is that part of her drive to do anything to survive also means that she will be exactly what people want her to be, at least in their eyes, and creates her own reality in this sense that the moment that they're not useful anymore, she kills them and becomes part of another group and becomes what they want. It's like she's like the Taylor Swift of bad guys. She'll just, there's a lyric that Taylor Swift says where she says, like, I can be what you want for a month or so in one of her songs. It's something to that. I'm paraphrasing. But, that's kind of what Phasma does. Okay. She will become whatever people want her to be, and as long as it benefits her, and the moment that she's able to, she kills them. So she continually creates her own altered reality, and it's kind of creepy because she literally exchanges the truth for a lie and makes the lie her truth.
Yeah, no, I like that. Another thing that she reminds me of, actually, because there's such a point throughout the entire thing, because she comes from a culture where masks are valued, and it's pointed out that she always wore her mask, and we've only seen her on screen in her mask. And it's very much a point that the character of Cardinal gets to, where he says nobody's ever seen her without her mask. Mm-hmm. I think it really is interesting in that, in a sense, it reminds me almost of a Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers from the horror genre, where they're defined by their masks. And then I think there's an added step here because Kylo Ren is defined by his mask, and when he loses his mask is, when he seems to lose his footing, as it were. And so I wonder if there's almost a parallel there, that the First Order, that people like Phasma and Ren are defined by their masks, and the people you truly have to fear, as we come to find out in the book, are Armitage Hux, who are like that in plain view, who don't feel any need to disguise what they really are.
Well, and I think that's so interesting because there's also this way in which Phasma's mask hides the fact that she is less than human through her actions. Like, that's something that we see, and that as she kind of makes the transition in the book from wearing the masks and the outfit of her tribe to the one of the First Order, she becomes more and more robotic or droid-like, and that every bit of humanity is kind of being squelched out of her, and by extension, what we see is that the First Order does this as well. But that idea of like this mask is that she's covering up her humanity because she doesn't even have humanity. Because humanity as you feel like Delilah Dawson in the book is portraying it as is somebody like Sev, or even Cardinal, who has this. You wouldn't expect Civ or where she grew up to have this kind of humanity, or Cardinal with what he's been through and who he is in the First Order. But even they have this semblance of an idea of what's somehow good or right, and even if it's been skewed or warped in some way, they still have it, whereas she and somebody like Brendel Hux and Armitage Hux, and maybe even Kylo Ren, don't seem to have at all. Kylo's a little bit of it. We are doing a little bit of speculation on that, but I mean, the idea of that's a super scary thing.
Yeah, although it's something that supports that as well is the fact that, and to get to sort of the serial killer mentality of it, is Dawson does a good point of underlining that as Phasma learns to speak the dialect closer to Brendel, she's imitating his voice and his accent. And that is sort of a hint of, a sociopath, is that they're an imitator. They don't like that empathy. You know what? They're like replicants. Like they imitate emotion,
yes,
but they don't have emotion. They learn how to function in society by observing the others around them. And I think that carries through as well. So, I have to give.
She's like the Dexter of Star Wars.
Ooh, that's a great pull. That's exactly right. You're absolutely right. The Dexter of Star Wars. Excellent point. Yeah.
Which is so creepy, and I think that's what Delilah Dawson does so well in the book, and she makes it scary. She makes this type of behavior and this type of person who is so utterly selfish and self-absorbed that nothing else matters to them with their own survival, one of the scariest villains you've ever seen. Because isn't that the scariest type of person in the world? Somebody who literally cares nothing for anyone else but themselves.
There's actually a very large sense here for me comparing this book about Phasma to the stuff that we got about Boba Fett before the prequels completely invalidated all of that nonsense, where she does in this book what I think should have been done with Boba Fett in the 90s, in that expansive time of the expanded universe when the prequels were never, it wasn't even in anybody's mind, and they were free to create the backstory for Boba Fett. There was this immediate drive, this immediate urge to alleviate him of his villainy and turn him into an anti-hero. That's where we get Jaster Muriel from. That's where we get a whole ton of where he goes around with Dengar, and they sort of softened him in the comics and stuff like that. And you find out that he was just really rough and utilitarian and almost sympathetic in a way. And they pursued that path with Fett, and that was what was so dissatisfying for me. And so I give real credit to Dawson for going full steam ahead and saying, I'm not going to make Phasma likable. She's not a hero character. This is a character, and we're going to study her, but she resists the urge to make her seem to have a redemptive arc in any way, or for me to look at her on screen and say, oh yeah, but and I think that again, I think that really ties into why she's an outlier in her own tribe at the very beginning. Through the whole thing, Dawson goes the extra mile to prove that Phasma is not a hero, even by accident. Is not there's nothing particularly redeemable about her character at this point.
To quote Mike Cole, who was on the masculinity panel that I did at Star Wars Dragonton track that we released on our aggressive negotiations track, Phasma is a stone cold dealer of death. Like, that's just who she is. And I think it's it's phenomenal that, like you said, Dawson doesn't shy away from kind of making this Hannibalistic type of character who's just so ingrained with the evil of this. Again, I feel like it's the ultimate selfishness that, again, she doesn't explain away as the planet that she grew up on or anything like that. It's just, this is who this person is. And what we know that to be is evil, because it cares nothing for anybody else but herself. And it's great that we are just allowed to have a character who is just utterly pure evil, but at the same time, I don't think is just a one-note character. That's what's so interesting. I think Dawson is able to create, through the stories that you tell here about her past, that you're never quite sure how she's going to make that turn on whoever it is that she's going to turn on, and that's what's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So the story setup is this for the book, that Cardinal, who is and was Brendel Hux's right-hand man, has been supplanted by Phasma in the sense that he used to be the only trainer of the recruits, or I put that in air quotes, the recruits that they would get for the First Order troopers. And he was a part of the training program that brought them up. Once Phasma arrives, she becomes the person who finishes the training. He starts the training. So he has the children, she has the teens on into trooper. And he begins to distrust who she is. And so he tracks down a resistance spy who has also been on the trail of who Phasma is for the resistance, and captures her. Her name is Vi, and she tells him all of these stories. And what I thought was so interesting was the way in which the book here really shows the importance of history and context, because that's how we know what something is or who somebody is because of those two things. And I thought in the world we live in today, this is one of the most important points that the book makes.
Yeah, I mean, up to and including Vi says at one point, this might be an internal monologue or whatever, but she even admits to the audience that there's maybe even been a little embellishment about Phasma's backstory here, but not really. This is the true story, but it's maybe a Man Who Shot Liberty Valance type of, a little bit fuzzy on the margins, but it's a truer version of history than the one that the First Order has been putting forward about Phasma, which is decidedly different. And I think that, in terms of history and context, yeah, I think there's very much a subtext of history being, everybody loves to use the phrase history is told by the victors. And I think that Phasma is a victor. She's a winner in the sense that her goal was survival, and she has survived, and she has escaped, and she's gotten off the planet, and she has, become a part of the First Order. And so the story that everybody knows about her is the one that she is willing to tell. And we're finding out, the context is that in a sense, what we know is that she has told the truth from a certain point of view, that she was, she came from humble beginnings and fought her way up and has risen through the ranks. That's absolutely true. What we find out is that it was a lot more bloody and unpleasant than just that version of the story.
Well, and there's this great quote, too, because, Cardinal is getting frustrated as she's telling these stories. He's like, so what? Phasma's great. She's a liar. She's dishonorable. So what? She might have lied a little, but it's for the greater good, right? The First Order doesn't care about any of this. And she says to him, but you should. She's the sum total of her stories, And the point is so poignant today when we think about this idea of, when we look at our world and we say, oh, well, so what? So somebody did this or somebody did that. Your character is defined by your actions. And who you are is defined by your actions. And yes, that's a scary thing. I can be personal and say, even when I look at my own life, there are things that are there that I'm like, that shows such horrible character in my own self. But when we deny that fact that it's not, as Dumbledore says to Harry and Harry Potter, it's not our abilities that show who we are, it's our choices. And the choices that Phasma makes are the sum total of her character throughout the story. And what we see of her character is that she doesn't have any character. Like, her only value is her survival. That's it.
Yeah.
And anybody whose only value is their own survival at the cost of anyone else, well, that's a scary place to be.
Here's the truly unsettling thing about that perspective. And this doesn't invalidate anything about the book at all or anything like that, but it seems to be a perspective that is creeping in more and more with the sequel era stuff that is unsettling to me, in that, yes, you're the sum of your stories, and yes, your decisions define you, and yes, you should keep an eye on people who have done things in their past, and you should look at them and you should say, it's not just this one story, it's all of these stories put together give you the complete picture of the person. Vi even holds back, so to speak, until we get one last story that really throws it into stark relief of how cutthroat Phasma is. That removes any chance of it to say, well, she just came from a tough background. You find out that she's been making these choices from the beginning. And what is unsettling to me about that, and I'm not trying to give it too much weight here, but a very important point to Lucas when he made the original 6 Star Wars films was redemption. Vader makes terrible, awful, positively evil decisions, but the door was always open for him to redeem himself. And I, again, am not trying to assign too much weight to this, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on stories like this, because they will indicate a tendency maybe within the stories. Are these Star Wars stories being told in an era where people no longer believe in redemption? Maybe that's why back in the 90s, Fett was given all of these sort of, get out of jail free cards to turn him into an anti-hero, is because it's from a different era.
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think at the moment I'm going to take it more as the fact that we're going to explore the people who choose to not allow redemption to be part of their story. Because Vader in the end makes that choice, but it's also based off of other people being able to get to him. Spoiler alert, if you're still listening, Cardinal in the end makes the choice to give Vi the opportunity to survive. And then in the end, she saves him. And so there's that sense of redemption for a character like Cardinal, right? But I think part of that is because there's still a spark of humanity left in Cardinal, whereas Phasma has continually, through the choices she's made, to destroy any force of spirit, like she squelched the spirit of humanity in herself so much that it's dead. And there isn't that choice anymore. There's like a point where there is a point of no return. And I think that's kind of interesting to be able to explore, to say, yeah, somebody can be so much to the dark side that there's no, and I don't mean just dark side of the force, but I mean just the dark side of life, evil, to choose evil, which through Phasma is just this utter selfishness, which, is anathema to everything we think of as being a good human being. That you can do that so long that you've destroyed any hope of redemption. And I think that's an interesting story to mine as well. As long as we don't, like you said, lose that Star Wars is a place where people who have done awful things can still find redemption.
Right.
But I think with Phasma, it's interesting to think of and explore a character to where, and this is, I've honestly kind of hoped this might be where they take Kylo Ren as well, where, we finally see the evil person that just doesn't want to be redeemed, and that they have to be destroyed because that's what has to be done to people who will not be redeemed, in the sense of like a Hitler,
Right. No, and the thing is, of course, there are people like that throughout history, but it's always been, I guess the stories that I'm thinking of, the fairy tale that informs Star Wars as a whole has always been about these, hope. Right? I mean, Rogue One, the last one, hope. And it's about hope, and it's about not giving up, and it's about continuing to drive on. I think that maybe what is affecting me, again, I'm not trying to give too much weight to it, but we have gotten a lot of stories up to this point telling the First Order's point of view. And granted, it's because we've been asking for that world building, and so that's what they're delivering to us. But at the same time, I don't want them to wallow in it. I want to spend time with the good guys and the redeemable people,
right?
The people that are going to make me feel good at the end of the story. I don't want just stories about the bad people.
And I agree with you, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was really thankful for, the character of Cardinal in the story and where his storyline goes. Dawson said at the launch party that we had at Dragon Con for the book, her and Claudia Gray were there. She said, what's interesting is that Cardinal in any other book would be the villain.
Right.
But then you have Phasma, and you see that there's an even worse villain than somebody like this. And at the same time, too, Cardinal is also somebody that there is a chance still of redemption. And I'm right there with you. Like, I love that this book kind of had that in there, because without it, it would be so bleak and nihilistic. It would just kind of be depressing. It's like, well, it's Star Wars Nietzsche, like.
This is another thing, though, is this actually winds up making me more intrigued to read the Leia book, because they're both released at the same time on the same day. Will they act as bookends for each other? Will they act as the two extremes going on in this to provide a picture of the whole that we're trying to appreciate going into The Last Jedi?
And wow. And I would answer the question to say I think you're absolutely right. And I kind of like the way that we've inadvertently decided to cover the books then, because this one I think gives that kind of bleakness to it. And I think Leia is absolutely a book. I mean, it's the coming-of-age story of Princess Leia, so I not giving any spoilers away, I think it absolutely does that. It creates that bookend to where, like, if you're reading them in this order.
So, to borrow from Mike Schindler, another host here on Trek FM, who I have the pleasure of co-hosting Stage 9 with, it's a double feature. These books should be read together.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No,
okay.
No, that's a really great point. So we've danced around the idea that the First Order really gets a lot of play in this book, because we get the opportunity to spend a lot of time with people that are big in the First Order, like Brendel Hux, like Cardinal, and, of course, Phasma, who will become such a big player in the book. And I thought it was one of the things that was really interesting and scary was the way in which the First Order truly are the fanatics. Like, they take the Empire to the nth degree. And I was thinking about this, and so I want to ask you if this makes sense. And let me know if I'm wrong, and you will, I know. The Empire...
That's why you invite me on here, man.
Yeah, well, no. So the Empire comes into being in a much less forceful way, right? I mean, to the rest of the galaxy, it looks like a savior, at least at the beginning. we're going to have peace. We're going to have this guy, this kindly old guy who's going to come in and he's really going to make everything okay, right? The Republic was crumbling anyway. We're going to have something that's going to be great. So it really becomes something that people actually can believe in. It's not really necessarily, they don't realize it's being forced on them. It is, but they don't even realize it, right? Whereas the First Order are this totally different thing where it's like they are the absolute fanatics who believe almost in some ways that Palpatine wasn't going far enough. Like, we must impose our order on this chaos, and we'll do that however we have to. And I thought that was so interesting, the way that they just... It's not even like Nazis and neo-Nazis. Like, the closest they come to is the fanaticism we see, in our modern-day terrorists. That kind of fanaticism where they just will. They are, and yet in a more ordered sense of, like... does any of that make sense?
It does. It does, because I think that Palpatine comes in and the structure is there, and he subverts the structure so that he can gain power, so that he can control everything. And he's not building anything. He's simply subverting what exists already. And the First Order would be people that would come in and say, nope, got to burn the whole house down and just rebuild. There is absolutely nothing here that works. And so, in a sense, I would think that you could extend it and say that the First Order would admire Palpatine and what he did to subvert that, but recognize that a mistake was leaving anything intact that could be used against him, which then winds up which I guess you could say is embodied by Vader. He doesn't build his own Sith as he should have. He builds his own Sith with Maul, but then he subverts what exists with both Dooku and Vader, and that winds up being his undoing. So Dooku and Vader wind up being the very symbol of what he did wrong, and so they want to come in and just go from scratch. And so that makes complete sense to me, and I think adds another layer to Hux's speech in The Force Awakens when he is completely unhinged and he's talking about the corrupt Republic and how awful they are. The First Order might view the Empire as simply just another imperfect iteration of the Republic. And so the Republic never really went away for them.
Oh, I love that, because as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, the closest that I can kind of come to who they are is the fanaticism of the Bolshevik Revolution. Yeah. And the way it just destroys and burns to the ground everything that Russia was, and tries to rebuild it, and becomes this place where, you end up with a place like Stalinist Russia, where everything is squelched out of it, and it's done from this. And there's a couple quotes I want to read real quick from the book. So bear with us, because I think it really brings to light where the First Order is at this point. Cardinal is thinking to himself, and he says, "This is what the First Order is all about: giving everybody equal opportunity to succeed, no matter how lowly they're beginning or how far off their planet." There will be no rich kids here lording over the orphans, no lobbyists or interest groups or bribes. No one is starving or thirsty or dying of exposure. As far as Cardinal was concerned, anyone who opposed the obvious benefits of the First Order was a fool. And then the last one is Brendel talking to Phasma, and she asks him, "Does your First Order not seek to rule then? Yet you seem to be opposed to ruling." He grunted, "There is a difference. The First Order wishes to bring equality and to destroy all the petty politics of rotten bureaucracy from the plague of the galaxy. I speak of an enlightened government of thousands of people working on the behalf of billions of unenlightened people. In a place like this, however, the decisions were being made by one person only, or perhaps a small handful of wealthy despots, and their first interest was in lining their own pockets. And so, like, they've created this, and this is the beauty of this story, they've created this narrative, this false narrative, this fake news, if you want, about the First Order, which is that we're all about bringing order and stability and equality to the galaxy. And how do they do that? By putting their boot down on everyone and making everyone the lowest level possible, while those in the very top echelons, live in comfort and peace and joy and luxury. We even see that in the story. And I think it's that she's really combined all of these different things, but it really brings to mind what we know of happened in communist Russia, what's happened in places like North Korea, or China was like this for so long. And so she's really used all of this history to create this fanatical First Order that wants to say that it's one thing, but it's really another. And it's just like Phasma. They say they're one thing, but they're really another. And they just say it loud enough and long enough that people start to believe it, even though it's a lie.
Well, I mean, it becomes a matter of survival to believe it. If you don't believe it, if you speak out against it, you're done. And they make that extremely clear, because as soon as Cardinal loses his faith, Phasma gets rid of him. As soon as Hux is no longer useful. And the thing is, I like the fact that you are that you drew the comparison to the Bolsheviks and that revolution over there, because I actually read a book not so long ago called Koba the Dread, which was all about Stalin and went into great detail about how this revolution that seemed to have these worthwhile ideals really did go off the rails, and how it paved the way for somebody like Stalin to come in and manipulate its own system to make it even more brutal and awful. But to further it, you could almost see Palpatine as Lenin, and then maybe Snoke is like the Stalin, where he comes in and he says, you did the best you could, but we got to do this my way, and we're gonna completely level it and wipe it out. And I think that actually, I mean, in a large way, I think the really important thing that this book does, besides paint a very clear picture of why we should care about Phasma, is exactly what you're getting at here about the nature of the First Order. It's making the First Order not just an Imperial echo, which I think would be one of the big criticisms thrown at it after The Force Awakens of, it's Empire Mark II. No, it really is worse than that. It really is even more like it's almost like John Gotti was saying, once you get rid of me, what's behind me is even worse. And so in a sense, the First Order is, even worse.
What's even worse?
Yeah. It's the thing that you didn't realize, that Palpatine was actually standing in, like, he wasn't intending to. It's not like there was anything noble or good about Palpatine at all. It's just, once you killed the big bug, and then, the even bigger bug was like, hey, cool, no competition, I'm coming in.
There's always a bigger fish.
Yeah. Qui-Gon knew it. Qui-Gon knew it.
Well, and what I like about what you're saying, too, is the way in which the book, and through Cardinal, shows the way in which the First Order brainwashes and conditions its troops. They are legitimately, and when I say brainwashed, I mean it, they are subjected to subliminal messaging, specific targeted propaganda that they have to watch. They fall asleep to it every night. It reminds me of the way in which, kind of North Korea is being controlled at this moment, where there's nothing that they don't want you to know that you can know. And the First Order is creating a group of followers who know nothing but what they're told, the truth, the quote-unquote truth of the First Order. And what's so scary about it is that it's only those in power to which truly can wield this. And this is the scary thing, is at the very end, when Cardinal faces off with Phasma, she says, "Oh, Cardinal, that's your problem. You were only ever meant to be the tool, not the hand that wields it. You're what Brendel thought he wanted, a dull creature he created to do his will. But me? I'm what he didn't even know he needed. I'm your evolution. And what that means, you're dead weight, extinct." And, like, that's the scariness. Like, that's who's in control of the First Order, is people that
Right.
are that sadistic, psychotic, and crazy scary with evil. Like, and they don't even see it. Like, they are, and like, when we think about the First Order now, I think this book does such a great job of having set that up that, yes, like you said, they are absolutely 100% worse than the Empire.
Well,
Which
they're
is
worse.
kind of crazy to think of.
They're worse in the sense that it's not just that they don't see how evil they are. They see and understand how evil they are. They're cool with it.
Yeah,
They
they just
don't-
like it.
They don't care. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
In a sense, there's a very Richard III character to it. Of, I'm bad, or Iago from Othello, where it's, what's he then that says I play the villain? I'm doing what I need to do. Who are you to judge me? I'm the one that, I've been wronged. The world doesn't make sense anymore, and I deserve what is coming to me, and so I'm going to do what I need to do to get it.
Well, and I think what I love that Delilah Dawson does here is that she shows the utter scariness. I can't think of an even better word than that, but the utter scariness of groupthink in the worst possible sense, where all freedom is truly squelched out, and the only information is the information which is controlled by a few. And this is the importance of, in the world in which we live today, I think the importance of this book is that it's talking about the idea that this is what happens when we don't have freedom of speech, when people are not allowed to say and disagree and to argue. Yes, as messy as all of that is, that they're talking about the bureaucracy and the politics. Yeah, it's messy because people don't agree. But the moment that only a few get to decide,
Well,
what one can be said, what two is right for you to think, and three, how you should serve the glorious First Order. I mean, I don't know. Again, this book is full of creepiness, and this is one of the creepiest things.
See, the thing is, you're sitting there talking about the bureaucracy, and and it's messy, and people don't agree, and all I can think of is Anakin saying, "Well, then they should be made to agree by someone
and that's
else,
what the
someone
First Order
wise."
is all about.
Yeah.
They should be made to agree.
And it's really interesting. It's an interesting thread to pull, and it is that world building that we really wanted, and I think underlines. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter if we're getting it now, but I distinctly remember the conversations going into The Force Awakens of, where's my universe? Where's my galaxy? What's going on going into this? In a sense, this feels even more like the journey to The Force Awakens than the journey to The Last Jedi.
Yeah, that's actually pretty true. And I think I want to just comment real quickly, because I think this is something that we have talked about before, but I think it bears repeating. It's nice that this is coming in a book form, and that it's here. But I also think that it's sad that more of this wasn't, say, in The Force Awakens to allow the resonance to be there. Because if I had understood, I think, and if everybody had really understood just kind of the ramifications of everything that's going on, I mean, this book even points out, like you said, this is a great Journey to the Force Awakens, because we find out that, the New Republic doesn't think that the First Order is a threat. So there is this whole fanatical regime out there that they're just like, it's fine. It's like the JV team. It's cool. That
Right.
kind of understanding, I think, is so... I mean, when you get that and you watch The Force Awakens, it completely changes how you watch the entire movie. But that's not actually really in the movie. all that much, as much as I think it should have been. And so I love that we're getting this here, but I worry in some senses that, people are kind of losing right now because, what is the percentage of people in that actually read extended material? I would say it's probably like what? Maybe 5%, maybe.
It's not more than half. I can promise you that. This book isn't going to be read by my wife or my kids before they see The Last Jedi or anything like that. But I think that a very important thing to remember is that for that audience, the world building that we got in The Force Awakens was enough. They got it, they understood it, it was fine, whatever. And there are bits and pieces there where, when Poe is brought off of, when he's brought onto the hangar deck of the Finalizer and he looks around, there is a moment where you see his face where it drops, where you can tell he's having a reaction of, wow, there's a lot more here than I expected to see. This is more prepared than I thought. And Finn keeps talking about, you don't know the First Order, and it's there. And then Hux has his speech, which I think really lays a foundation. But I don't necessarily disagree with you in the sense that there's enough there for the casual fan, but for the fan like we are, where we read all of the stuff that comes out, we're going to read the journey to this and the journey to that, and we're going to stay focused on it. Not saying we're better fans or gatekeepers or anything like that. I'm just saying for our vibe, these sorts of things have become necessary in order to placate the questions that we have. It's not like they tell us how Snoke came to power. They don't even interact with Kylo Ren. They mention him a couple of times in this book. And there are hints and allusions, but there's enough. This is the type of story that would have been enough. We don't have a complete picture of anything but Phasma at the end of this book. We have partial hints here and there about the other characters that we're going to encounter, but we don't, it's not like we have a clear vision of, members of the First Order were also members of the Galactic Senate that split off and ran off or anything like that. But, I'm just trying to sort of play both sides of it here and say that, I agree with you. This type of stuff is tailor-made and well suited to getting me on board with these sorts of things, or getting you on board with these sorts of things, and we just won't, and it will be enough for us.
One of the things that, and this is kind of more of a quick point, but I think it's really interesting. The Brendel has a whole thing about how the world, they're asking foolish questions of him. And the wonderful thing about civilization is you buy what you need. You support your merchants and your artisans. Basically, the idea that kind of comes across is that, the wonderful thing about civilization is that I don't have to think about where things come from, like my food or my clothes or any of that stuff. I can just go and buy it. And I thought that was a really interesting dig at the world in which we live, where people don't know where their food come from. And, they don't know where their clothes come from and all of this kind of stuff. And we're so removed from the natural world. And that also plays into what happened, I think, in a way on Parnassus in the first place, that this corporation had come in and they ended up destroying the planet or at least this part of the planet with a nuclear meltdown. And just the way in which we kind of treat the things around us. And I thought that was very interesting, because that kind of out of touch with nature plays into the whole way that the First Order acts about everything. But it was an interesting juxtaposition because of what we know about the New Republic and how they're kind of guilty of some of these things about not really caring about parts of the galaxy that maybe haven't been liberated or anything, and really taking care. It was just so interesting the way that she works this all together, and I found it fascinating.
Well, I mean, there's also an echo of Lucas, who was very much obsessed with the idea of staying in touch with the natural force, with the living force. And, Endor Rebirth is this, giant forest planet, nothing but green and life and vivaciousness. And
Right.
Coruscant is the polar opposite of just a giant city planet. And I do agree with you that there is I don't even think it's too subtle, where you see very much the danger of not understanding the world or how it works or the impact that you're going to have on it when you nobody cares about Parnassus because they don't see the destruction. Brendel's never seen it before. Oh, weird. Okay. Well, yeah, this is what happened. And, yeah, it's kind of a shame, but, I mean, the thing is, you could very easily get on a very tall soapbox and talk about the different industries that you see, delivering goods that maybe don't take, a great deal of care with how they produce things. And, all that just to say that, that I agree with you. I think that there's a very clear message about be wary about what your impact is what you're getting worth the cost, because you are going to create monsters. Might not be Phasma, but there will be monsters created when you go over and you don't pay mind to what it is that you're doing or do it properly.
Well, and it's so interesting, too, because, there's this juxtaposition as well as of the way that the Old Republic became this thing that only became about itself, right? Perpetuating the self or whatever small tribe you were part of or trade federation or whatever. This corporation had used people and worlds for their own gain and really didn't care about the people, because when this happened, they just abandoned the world and left it in ruin. And it was kind of an interesting reality of what the First Order kind of is as well, in the way in which they really don't care about the people or worlds. They just want to be in control. And they don't really care about how that happens or what worlds they have to destroy. Obviously, they're willing to melt down entire sectors of space, with a Darkular base. They mass murdered billions of people in seconds, with that thing. So I just thought that was really interesting. But it was also kind of interesting to me, too, because then it seems like, and specifically referencing the Aftermath books, the New Republic seems to be kind of guilty of this as well, because their commitment wavers once certain systems and it seems like the galaxy is semi-liberated enough that they're willing to not continue that commitment to liberating places like Kashyyyk and other, unliberated planets, and that it's just good enough because, it's not worth the cost, maybe, or maybe they just don't see it, out of sight, out of mind. And what I kind of liked is just kind of how this complicates everything. Like, it's not so cut and dry and black and white when we start thinking about all of these different issues, and how there are some scary similarities between New Republic, Old Republic, First Order. They all have some veins of some of the same issues. I don't know. That was just something that really fascinated me about the story, in the ways in which it's just, I don't know, if it's Facebook status, it would be it's complicated.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that a definite theme, all throughout, going back to the prequels and bringing it forward, is the ultimate question is, what level of chaos are you comfortable with? Mm-hmm. Because there will always be chaos. The First Order is chasing a dragon, as it were, where their whole idea of first order, as Cardinal points out, is impossible. Leia says it to Tarkin. The more systems, the more you tighten your grip, the more systems will slip through your fingers. And so, in a sense, the First Order is on a fool's errand trying to impose absolute order. Palpatine tried to subvert the Republic so that the structure's already in place. I can just manipulate things. I've already got a way to control everything here. Well, that winds up not being true. The Republic was defined by its own chaos because Padme says to Shmi, slavery was illegal. And, Shmi basically says the Republic doesn't exist out here. We're on the fringes. And so it becomes, I think, that continual back and forth dance of how much chaos are you comfortable with and when do you strike that right balance?
Well, and it reminds me of, and this goes to any group, but when you don't live up to the principles that you say that you stand for, and Cardinal has a very damning statement when he's talking to Vi, and he says, look, I didn't know what it was like to have a full stomach until Brindle Hux found me. I'd never slept off the sand. I'd never gone a night without waking to rats or sand fleas or something worse nibbling on me. The other kids were cruel. The adults were worse. That's what your New Republic does. It ignores backwater planets and funnels money to the rich planets who can afford to have a voice in the Senate. Who spoke for Jakku? No one. And he says, who spoke for the boy I was? No one. And it becomes this thing where the anger that people can have when something like the New Republic doesn't live up to the values it says that it has. And I think that's an interesting thing because we really see how quickly, even in, 20 years or so, even beginning, like we saw in the Aftermath series, Mon Mothma's kind of ready to, set up shop and be done. Like, let's disband we're good. We're all good, instead of continuing on to the really hard work that should be continued, which is to really liberate the rest of the galaxy and set up freedom and prosperity for everyone. The hope of the rebellion, which is to, throw off the yoke. And that I thought that was really interesting because this book portrays the way in which the First Order is able to find so many disenfranchised people and woo them to their cause because the New Republic isn't really willing to necessarily live up to its promises.
That there's actually something that there's something here that I do want to speak to because you mentioned Cardinal's background being from Jakku. I think that there's another danger here because we've gone back to Jakku with some characters a number of times in the books leading up to it. And we know that
Why does everybody want to go back to Jakku?
But that sort of speaks to my point. Is Jakku, yes, we all know Jakku and we all know Tatooine had both Skywalkers on it and Kenobi hid there and that sort of thing. But there is a danger here in terms of it becoming a small galaxy again. Because one of the jokes that we made on a previous 602 about another book was everybody was at Endor. And now it seems that everybody's from Jakku. And
we'll always have Jakku.
Right. It's a big galaxy, man. It is not a big sin. I don't hold it against the book, but when I found out he was from Jakku, my reaction was, oh, okay. All right. I know Jakku. And if we've gone to Jakku and Cardinal is the second person we know of, the second character we know of in the larger series of books that has been pulled either by Palpatine or by the First Order, why weren't more people drafted from Jakku? Because everybody was unhappy on Jakku.
Well, and we do get a sense in the last Aftermath book that it seems to be like a way station for orphans and that there are a lot of them there. And that this was a place that the First Order definitely, after the big battle that happens there, that they take a lot of these kids with them and use them as, the first troop rankings that they create. So, it really does get that sense, but it is very interesting that Jakku has become the new Tatooine.
But it's even more than that. Like we the two Skywalkers being from Tatooine are, although technically, of course, Anakin was born on another planet, but with both Skywalkers coming from Tatooine, it served that whole story structure, the Norse mythology, tone poem sort of thing, going with stuff. And again, it's not a killer thing. I'm not necessarily knocking it. I'm just saying that having Jakku be such a waypoint for so many of these side characters that we're meeting along the way, I would prefer to branch away from it if possible. But again, the book as a whole was so good. It's not like I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, geez, this is terrible. It's just it was just something that struck that chord with me. But actually, another thing, because we talk about how Cardinal was originally the one who did the training program and everything. Wouldn't it be so interesting? Because we don't have his exact age, and I'm not entirely clear on how long before Force Awakens this Cardinal Phasma showdown happens. Wouldn't it be so interesting?
Well, I was just going to say that has been a question that I even asked Pablo Hidalgo about, because I wasn't sure of the timeline of the book. And so the Cardinal Phasma Vi stuff is all happening post Bloodline. So just for everyone, and the other stuff obviously takes place 10 years or so previously from that. But it's still kind of nebulous as to exactly when after Bloodline this is happening, how far away this is from the Force Awakens. That they're not specific.
So. Right. We don't know how far ahead, and since that was a little murky to me, an interesting thought to me is, would it be possible that Finn was, even for a short time, there while Cardinal was there, and that's why he is a little bit different, because he would have been in the program before Phasma took over everything after Cardinal's supposed death.
Right. No, that's actually a good point. Because one of the knocks that I would say against the Force Awakens is the fact that Finn doesn't really ever feel like a character who's been brainwashed. Really struggle through that, especially what we learn about what their training is like. Like, he never feels like that character, which is kind of strange. Especially when I read this, I was like, Finn doesn't really seem like somebody who's been through this kind of training.
Well, I mean, he has the PTSD moment in the battle when his friend gets killed, and for me that's enough. Somebody, you never know what battle is going to do to somebody when they're in that. But I think it would be neat to find out that he was one of those kids that was already in the program, and then Cardinal disappeared, and he. Inertia kept him going along, so maybe there are more troopers that we don't know about where that transition from Cardinal to Phasma is going to wind up backfiring on the First Order in some way.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. And I think you do raise a good point that if we do learn someday that Finn was a part of that, I think that would really help in that storyline. I like that a lot. Gosh, there's so much more that we can talk about in this book, John, but I feel like that instead of just continuing to ruin it all for everyone, where do you come down on Phasma, ratings-wise?
Well, as you know, I have always been happy to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and I've become notoriously cagey about locking into actual ratings with Star Wars related stuff. But I would definitely give this a hearty thumbs up. I would definitely say that this is completely, let's say we're in the range of, 4 out of 5 Death Stars for this. This is really solid stuff. It kept me engaged through the entire thing. I really enjoyed it from beginning to finish. I would highly recommend it to anybody who is not just interested in Phasma's character, but is legitimately interested in, well, what we've been talking about, which is providing some clarity as to what the nature of the First Order is.
I'm absolutely right there with you. My ranking is absolutely the same too. It's 4 out of 5 poison daggers. I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Lichen-covered daggers.
It's right. Or one of those sand beetles. Those things were just, ugh.
They were pretty great. I got to give her a lot of credit. Those things were awesome.
And that's the thing. I really want to call you out in such a great way, Delilah. If you do listen, you did such a fantastic job of creating a world that obviously referenced some things that we all know, like Mad Max, but it became its own thing. It felt Star Warsy enough. I never felt pulled out of the story in that sense. I loved the characters that you created. I thought Vi was such a fun character. She had all the spirit and hope of somebody that you expect to be under, the Resistance and Leia's leadership. Even though she works freelance as somebody gathering intelligence, she definitely believes in that role. So it was great. I thought the character of Civ, who we get the story, she got the stories from, and so all the stories have been passed down. And really, this is interesting because it's Phasma's like a secondhand legend, because we're not getting the whole story, or like it's in that legend sense. Like, they could always, if they wanted to, come in and tweak some things about Phasma's backstory, because this is being told story from another person and embellished a little bit at points.
Just to draw the comparison, there was an episode of the X-Files where they gave the history of Cancer Man, or as he was later known, Cigarette Smoking Man, and fans weren't nuts about it. And so they said, well, keep in mind, this is from the point of view of what the lone gunmen knew, and who were the 3 conspiracy theorist characters. And so they did the exact same thing, where they gave themselves room to back out and say, well, this isn't necessarily 100% what the case was. This was what somebody heard.
But in some ways, I think it makes sense, because I also want to call out the fact that this fits so well with the new Phasma comic, at least issue 1. So after you've read this and then you read that comic, understanding Phasma in The Force Awakens makes so much more sense. You know exactly why she gave up the code so quickly. She don't care. That's not all she cares is about finding a way to survive. And so I think that's this book does exactly what it needed to create a character to which now when you watch The Force Awakens, you completely understand her motivations for doing what she's doing there. And she is more scary and disturbing. It also makes the whole quip to Armitage about, maybe Snoke should think about clones. An even bigger dig, because you see how important this program has been from his father to him and everything. So, like, this book is just, it's doing everything that we do want in this series, which is to really open our eyes to what this sequel trilogy era is like. And for that, I just want to say thank you so much, Delilah Dawson. And for, Star Wars books, I don't know what you had to do to allow Disney to say yes to this, but this is great. This is the kind of stuff that we as fans really, really enjoy. So I think it's well done all around. And I'm really excited that we got the opportunity to talk about it, John. I was chomping at the bit to be able to dive into the thematic elements of this book and the storyline with you, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you being here. I want to say a huge thank you to the associate producers we have here on the 602 Club. Ken Tripp and Davis Grayson have been wonderful supporters of this show and the entire network through Patreon. Now, I'm sure you know, but if you don't, this is a massive network. It's a huge enterprise to put this together, and we can't do it without the help of listeners just like you. You can go over to patreon.com/trekfm, and you can see how you can support the network and become part of our team. Honestly, it's no joke. Every little bit helps. Every little bit a month. We have many different ways that we try to give back to you. There's some great perks that come with supporting us at different levels. So again, you can check all of that out at patreon.com/TrekFM. John, I have to say, it is always an absolute pleasure and a joy to have you back in the 602 Club. This is actually where we met. And so it's glad to have you back on your stool. But tell everybody where they can find you if they'd like to check you out on the internet and what else you're up to.
Oh, come on, y'all. You know where to find me. I'm Kessel Junkie online, and you can also find me right here on the network co-hosting Stage 9 with Mike Schindler. You can also find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. And if you go on over to the Nerd Party, I'm again with Mike Schindler as a part of Great Shot Kid. And you can find me on the Nerd Party as well with you, Matt, co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations.
Absolutely, which I hope everybody will do. This was kind of the godfather of that show, and go check it out. As I mentioned earlier, we dropped the panel that I did there at Dragon Con. Masculinity in Star Wars was a fantastic conversation with an author-laden panel. I was the only non-author on there. So some great stuff. I hope you'll check that out and listen to John and I on Aggressive Negotiations. I'm over there on the Nerd Party as well doing Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, and we're talking about all the Harry Potter books, one chapter at a time. We are at the beginning of The Prisoner of Azkaban now, so I hope you'll go over there and check that out. Here on the Trek FM network, I'm also doing The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And last but not least, I'm doing a show that's called Cinema Stories, and that's where my friend Courtney and we talk all about film through the lens of faith. And you can find all of those shows that John and I do all on iTunes or anywhere you get your podcasts. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and may the Force be with you.